Good evening. The wind is blowing in some new directions. Tonight, first, there's a nor'easter outside, if you haven't noticed. Winter storm Athena, that's really its name. It's nothing compared to Superstorm Sandy, but with rain, high winds, and snow, it could spell trouble, especially to those already displaced or without power, and our hearts go out to you. We will get to this and to climate change shortly, but let's start with that surprisingly powerful political wind that hit us last night. Despite a weak economy and a surging opponent, Barack Obama did more than eke out a narrow victory last night. He won decisively in the Electoral College, 303 to 206 at last count. The popular vote was closer than in 2008, but the president did win by a margin estimated at 2 or 3 percentage points. It was a clear victory even before the Florida result, which is still, if you will, a hanging chad at the bottom of the nation. How? Why did the president win? Our first two guests tonight, Greg David, Crain's columnist and director of the Business and Economics program at the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism, and Mark Winston Griffith, community activist and executive director of the Brooklyn Movement Center. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I hope you weren't up too late last night watching.
It was pretty late.
Waiting for the speeches. That's where I gave
No,
up.
not for the speeches.
I saw the result. I did not wait for the speeches.
I didn't wait for the speeches either.
I think Romney was waiting for Karl Rove on Fox News to actually be convinced that the projections were right, which took a while. But Greg, do you think that the president won in spite of or because of the economy?
You know, I think because of the economy. The economy is really doing a lot better in the last 2 months. A few weeks ago, we found out we had 171,000 new jobs, near the magic 200,000 figure where we would really begin to put a dent in the unemployment rate. Home prices went up their most in 6 years the other day.
They're like 5% in the last period?
That in the last month over the year ago period. You know, the economy really is getting stronger. There are three things that happened. The economy is getting stronger. Obama and his team were able to pin the blame on George Bush for the economic downturn. And, you know, I think the inequality issue really played out in this election. Ever since Occupy Wall Street came along, the political conversation that had occurred 2 years ago got changed. And I think a lot of people who are really angry about the economy are just as angry about the fact they think rich people are getting away with too much. Romney was a rich person. I think it really wound up undercutting his message. After all, the exit polls said 60% said the economy was the most important issue, and Obama wins and carries every battleground state but two.
Yeah, really interesting. And he had caught up in the polls with respect to who is most competent to deal with the economy. The exit polls showed Romney got 51%, but Obama got 47% on that question, which candidate is best equipped to deal with the economy. And we also saw in the exit polls, Mark, that people were very aware of class in this election. And maybe the Republicans would call it a class war or class warfare, but people had a keen sense of where Romney was as compared with them, as compared with where they aspired to be and where they feared that they might wind up.
Right. Well, I think that he was painted as and of course he helped paint himself, right? I mean, the comment about 47%, sorry, of the country being, considering themselves victims. I think that he painted himself, and Obama was able to paint him as someone who had lived a life that was not like the rest of the country and could not relate to the pain that people were going through, and was financially above it all. And I don't think that he ever climbed out of that, and he was never able to use his corporate experience as the credential that he needed to talk authoritatively about the economy.
It's interesting to me that you mentioned Occupy, of which you've been a critic. We've discussed that. And many Democrats and liberals and progressives have been critical of Occupy, saying the Tea Party decided to take over Congress, and they did it when they launched a movement, Occupy takes over a park, and things like that. And the fear or conclusion that Occupy was becoming irrelevant. But do you think that its message, even though it was an Uber message, not a get in there and fight for candidates message, really resonated?
Yes, I think it changed the whole political conversation in the country. Occupy Wall Street has disappeared. It has left no political legacy, unlike the Tea Party. After all, the Republicans still control the House by almost the same margin that they did before. But it did change the conversation, and inequality was a key issue in this election, and Obama talked a lot about it a lot, and it mattered, and it wasn't part of the equation before Occupy Wall Street brought such attention to it.
I want to play a clip of Mitt Romney. This, for those of you who didn't stay up so late last night, was from his concession speech. And listen to how, even though he's somewhat gracious in conceding defeat, he also kind of implies that Obama's economics are not consistent with what the founding fathers had in mind for this country.
And I ran for office because I'm concerned about America. This election is over, but our principles endure. I believe that the principles upon which this nation was founded are the only sure guide to a resurgent economy and to renewed greatness. Like so many of you, Paul and I have left everything on the field. We have given our all to this campaign.
All right, Governor Romney last night, before he probably, Mark, disappears from the stage. But it was a battle of economic visions in no small measure.
Yeah, and I think that, again, it's striking how he was positioned as the candidate who could speak to the economy and how important the economy was in this moment, and how that was what people were using to decide how they were going to vote. And he never made the argument. And to Greg's point before, I do think that Occupy did. I don't think you can really compare Occupy and the Tea Party, because I don't think Occupy ever aspired to become part of the political apparatus. What it did seek to do was change the conversation, and I'm not sure it completely transformed the conversation, but it changed it enough that I think it just made it more difficult for Romney.
It probably
I don't think Romney was talking about the economy there, actually.
Yes.
He was talking about the underlying issue, which is the size of the government in relationship to the economy and the role the government will play in that economy. And that was sort of a subtext which came up and went back and came up. But it also showed politically, especially in the Midwest, that Romney's position, which is the position of the vast majority of Republicans and conservatives, that the government's role has gotten too large and needs to be reduced, did not resonate, because just look at the hard time Romney had about the auto bailout and the fact that he never could articulate a real alternative strategy on the auto bailout.
Do you think we wind up more polarized as a country than we were going in? Again, some of the exit polls that I saw showed Democrats voted even more for Obama than in 2008. And you expect Democrats to vote for the Democrat, Republicans to vote for the Republican, but it was over 90% of people who call themselves Democrats voted for Obama this time, which is actually high. And over 90% of those who call themselves Republicans voted for Romney. Independents went more for Romney than they did for Obama and swung more to the Republicans than they had done in 2008. Are we a more polarized country politically, racially, than we were 4 years ago?
I think that's the way things are trending. There's nothing I heard from Republicans that indicate to me that there's going to be any kind of moderation in their views or how they're going to approach things politically. I think people are getting more entrenched. I think there's more resentment on each side. I think this campaign, I think it got ugly. And I think the sides, the lines were drawn even more starkly than they have been in the past.
Well, Obama was, among many other things, the candidate of racial reconciliation in 2008.
Right. That has all but disappeared.
He never pursued it explicitly as president.
I mean, and I think it goes beyond racial reconciliation. I think that he's abandoned this idea that he's the reconciler in chief. And I think he feels that he's been beaten back so badly by the Republicans that he has no choice but to pursue a particular agenda that's not about reconciliation.
And hold the thought for a second, Greg, because here's a clip from Obama's victory speech last night where, in a way, he takes a stab at reconciliation round 2. Note the 3 examples that he gives in this clip of Americans who he hopes to help.
We believe in a generous America, in a compassionate America, in a tolerant America, open to the dreams of an immigrant's daughter who studies in our schools and pledges to our flag. To the young boy on the south side of Chicago who sees a life beyond the nearest street corner. To the furniture worker's child in North Carolina who wants to become a doctor or a scientist, an engineer or an entrepreneur, a diplomat or even a president. That's the future we hope for. That's the vision we share. That's where we need to go. Forward. That's where we need to go.
President from last night. So, Greg, what was so interesting to me in that was that he started that threesome with one that he talked about a lot during the campaign, the DREAM Act, immigrant youth. But then he went to somebody in inner city Chicago. He dared not mention Chicago or New York City or Detroit or Cleveland, maybe Cleveland during the campaign, but implying an urban agenda. And then somebody from a state that he lost yesterday, North Carolina. I thought it was significant.
Yes, I think this election decided things, and I think he is in the driver's seat. This election decided that Obamacare will take effect, and that a major expansion of the way the government provides health care and for people will go into effect. This election decided taxes are going up on the rich. We just don't know how much. This election decided that we probably will no longer give such advantageous tax treatment to dividends and capital gains. And this election decided we're not going to make fundamental changes in Medicare. I think this has been a very significant election. Now, today, Speaker Boehner said he was willing to talk about the, quote, fiscal cliff and reach some compromise, but Obama holds all the cards here. Because if there isn't a compromise, taxes will go up on everyone, and he will be able to blame the Republicans, and he is in the driver's seat, at least for the near term.
I think what's interesting is that there was so much disappointment among liberals because the hope was Obama was going to come in as, fearlessly willing to be a one-term president. And I think that we recognized, the liberals recognized very early on that was not going to be the case. And so I think that the hope is that there's nothing, on some level, there's nothing to lose right now. And so that whatever he's going to do in his next 4 years, perhaps will be some of the things that he was not brave enough to do in the first 4 years.
The one thing that might happen now is immigration, and that's because not all Republicans, but many Republicans took the lesson from this. And is the number the Hispanic, Romney got 17% of the Hispanic vote, some incredible number.
It can't continue that way.
Republicans will never win again if that's the case. And even the Wall Street Journal this morning, now, which has always had a strong pro-immigration position, but speaks to this group, said Republicans have to get immigration off the agenda if they are ever going to win. In a way...
Romney got like 30, though, right?
30?
Not that that's
Oh, 30,
good.
right. 71. 71. Yes. Sorry, 17 was too low. I reversed it. It's 71 for Obama. Still, Hispanics are the fastest growing part of the American electorate, crucial in states like Florida. You're not going to win unless you get immigration off the agenda.
So, on that point, we're going to go out to Nevada right now and talk to Leo Murrieta. He is the 26-year-old state director for Mi Familia Vota, a national nonpartisan group that aims to increase Latino participation. And from all accounts, both nationally and in Nevada, Mr. Murrieta's efforts certainly have worked. Hello from New York. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes. Hi, Hi, thank you for having me on. How are you?
Good. Thank you for coming on with us. And I understand that this was your first election as a voter. So can you tell us a little bit about that experience for you personally?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you for having me on the program. Here in Nevada, we led a large campaign that started in February. For me, familiar with that. And we started off to do a large voter registration community campaign. We started off with the goal of collecting 11,000 voter registration forms, which we actually finished in August. And then we set a larger goal of an additional 5,500, which we completed the day before the close of registration. But we ended up with the 19,125 more voters on the rolls than when we started, and the majority of those being Latinos. So,
and to that point, I saw a statistic that of the electorate in Nevada, 18% of the voters yesterday were Latino. That compares to 13% in 2008, and that is a surge.
Absolutely, and it's an exciting number for our community. We've been working all year to make sure that our community's been engaged, and of course, we're a nonpartisan organization, but our main focus is that we need to participate so that candidates from both parties and all parties take our issues and concerns seriously.
Your phone line's breaking up a bit, so we're going to have to keep this short. But I do want to ask you one other thing, and that is the Republicans have been trying to appeal to Latino voters on the basis of prosperity. And so as there are more second and third generation Latinos in the country who do better, move more into the middle class, the Republican gamble has been that as they become more prosperous, they'll vote with their economic interests, as people tend to do, and so more of them will start becoming Republicans. Do you think that that is possible if the basic immigration status issues are resolved?
Well, I definitely think that as Latino voters become more assimilated into the American democratic process, that Republicans should take notice. The Republican Party should not write us off as voters who will always be against them. The conversation does circle around immigration, but that's not an issue that candidates have to get wrong. We are concerned about issues such as jobs, the economy, healthcare, and education.
Leo Murrieta, thank you very much for joining us. Mark Winston Griffith, what do you think about that same question? I mean, if, people won't care that much about whether their taxes go up by 5 percentage points if they think that the politician doesn't respect their basic humanity.
Right.
But if that issue is taken off the table through comprehensive immigration reform,
If what issue is taken off the table?
The immigration issue is taken off the table through a bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform, then do they start from scratch, and then they have a chance of growing with the Latino voters in ways that they haven't been able to do, the Republicans?
Perhaps. I mean, I think that both parties have drawn Latino voters a little bit too narrowly. I think that the way you described the Republican approach before, speaking to prosperity and speaking to, the sort of business interests of Latinos, I think does not take in their full humanity. And the way Democrats have approached it is to embrace immigration as the central issue in their lives, which I do think gets closer to their humanity. But once that is taken off the table, I think that both parties are going to have to find new language and new values to speak to. But I think that the Republicans are really going to be digging themselves out of a very deep deficit right now. I mean, I think that the primary was so deadly to Romney and to the party that they've got a long way to go to come out of that. Joining
us on the phone now is Judith Browne Dyannis in Washington, D.C. She's one of the nation's leading voting rights litigators and co-director of the Advancement Project, which is a self-described next-generation civil rights organization that also protects voter rights. She spent yesterday monitoring polling stations in Tampa, Florida, and as we mentioned before, as of this hour, Florida, believe it or not, is still too close to call in the presidential race. Thank you for joining us. Hello from New York.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So,
I'm Mark.
Hi, Judy. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine.
Old friends
Yes,
in
old
the
friends,
activist
yes.
community.
That's right.
So, I can only imagine what the country would be going through right now if they actually needed Florida again this year to decide the election. But let's say, hypothetically, that that was the case. Would you be out there today arguing that there was voter suppression that was worth litigating in court?
Yes, I would. I think, from what we witnessed yesterday in Florida, I just got back today, and I got calls from people throughout Florida, and I said, look, if there's a recount, I'm leaving. So,
Can't handle it.
But the thing that we witnessed was, so we didn't witness the kind of voter suppression that was the individual intimidation acts that were kind of a concerted effort of like Tea Party folks. I mean, we saw some of that, some people just acting out at some polling places, but what we did see are systemic failures in the way that we run our elections. And those systemic failures have made it harder for people to vote. And in fact, I think will lead to many ballots in Florida being tossed out, unfortunately.
What do you think is the biggest example of that in Florida? And Florida is famous for having these kinds of battles, trying to get people off the rolls in pretty aggressive ways or limit the hours they can vote. Or what was tell the people in New York what the headline from Florida was for you.
The headline was the long lines from early voting. And I think that those long lines, those 8-hour lines, and I know New Yorkers after this election clearly, can empathize with people in Florida because we know that there were long lines in New York yesterday also. But I think the long lines were due to a number of things. One is Governor Rick Scott decided that he wanted to reduce the amount of time that people could engage in early voting. And early voting has become a culture in Florida voting. And so people know I'd rather go early than have to wait till Tuesday because Tuesday is inconvenient. It's archaic that we have Election Day on Tuesday, and it doesn't really meet the needs of working America. And so the cutbacks in early voting led to these really long lines. It also was due to the fact that language assistance problems, especially in the Haitian community, where actually in Miami, the ballots are actually translated into Creole. But the translation wasn't that great because Creole tends to be more of an oral language than a written language. And so there were people that were there to help people, but there weren't enough people to assist. So that took forever. The ballots were 8 and 10 pages long. So imagine somebody reading a ballot to someone in Creole, and it's constitutional amendments, which is hard to read in English for a lawyer like me. And so I think those issues. But the thing that we also really are concerned about is this idea that we have this fail-safe kind of voting called provisional ballots. That after the 2000 election, Congress created this idea that at the end of the day, if your name wasn't on the rolls, if there was some kind of problem, that they'll give you a provisional ballot.
Right.
And now what we know is that they'll give you the provisional ballot, but that doesn't mean that it will be counted. And so I just witnessed myself, many people coming out of the polls very, disgusted, disappointed, upset, worried that their votes wouldn't be counted because they had been pushed into provisional ballots. And so part of what our work is going to be after this election is seeing why so many, and I'm talking about black voters in particular, were pushed into provisional ballots and whether or not those ballots actually get counted.
More stories and more lessons for Florida to be dealt with in the next election cycle. Thank you very much for joining us. And we're just about at time, but Greg David, I do want you to put on your Crain's hat for just a second and tell me how much you think the Dow plunging 300 points today had to do with Obama as opposed to Romney being elected.
To my surprise, I think a lot. Wall Street bet on the wrong horse. Goldman Sachs, previously a big giver to Democrats, went enormously in for Romney. I think people woke up this morning with a lot of regret. I also think that there is a attitude that, tax rates are going up on capital gains and dividends, and that will have real implications in the markets, and we better sort it out.
Hadn't they already factored that in?
I
Because
thought so, but I guess not.
the polls, in trade, all those things said Obama was going to win.
I guess they talked themselves into the same beliefs that Karl Rove did, and Peggy Noonan and other people I read who were sure the vote was going Romney's way.
Wow.
I guess Wall Street feels occupied today after the result of the election last night. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Up next, tonight's storm and why it's good political weather for climate scientists. Well, let's take a moment to check on the weather. If you look out your window, you'll see it is snowing sideways outside. Many especially vulnerable people are in trouble again because this wintry storm, actually that has a name, Athena, comes in the wake of Hurricane Sandy. It's predicted to last the night, bring 2 to 4 inches of snow in the region with gusting winds around 20 miles per hour. For the roughly 600,000 still without power in the Northeast and the thousands already forced from their homes, it could be especially a difficult night. In the hard-hit Rockaways, 4 healthcare facilities, mainly for older adults, have been evacuated tonight as a precautionary measure. Some along low-lying areas in New Jersey have been advised, though not ordered, to evacuate. That also is true for areas of New York City, Gerritsen Beach, Breezy Point, Hamilton Beach. The mayor is saying you're not ordered to, but you're advised to. And we have this other Athena-related news coming in now. As of 6:30, Long Island Railroad service was suspended. Bus service in the Rockaways suspended until 5 a.m. The MTA subway trains traveling at reduced speed tonight due to slippery track conditions on many of the lines. Some of that service may even be temporarily suspended. And according to nyc.gov's severe weather page, the city has made the following storm preparations, including urging all New Yorkers to stay indoors. In addition to those recommended but not mandatory evacuation areas that I mentioned, they are also halting all construction, closing all city parks, and encouraging drivers to stay off the road tonight, or if you have to drive, to use extreme caution. Adam Sobel knows about storms and New York's infrastructure. He is professor of Earth and Environmental Science at Columbia University's Lamont-Doherty Observatory. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Coincidence that this comes right after Sandy?
Well, I suppose the overall large-scale pattern that we're in with the big disturbance in the jet stream and cold air plunging south is actually not that different than what was there during Sandy. It's mostly the same overall pattern in place, with the difference being that there's no hurricane there. So this storm is a more garden variety, nor'easter. It's colder, and unusually cold, obviously, for early November. Unusual to have snow like this in New York City at this time.
I didn't know they name winter storms. Did you?
No, I hadn't heard this Athena name. Maybe it's a new thing. It's first letter of the alphabet.
So it's the first one, because it's only November the 7th.
Yeah.
What's your reaction to the presidential election as a climate scientist?
Yeah. As a climate scientist, I'm pleased. I think we got the candidate and the party that takes climate more seriously, takes science more seriously. That said, I think some of us felt some disappointment over the last 4 years that we didn't hear climate mentioned much, despite the fact that we know it keeps getting warmer and the risks aren't going away. They're getting worse as we emit more greenhouse gases. The president did some good things, supported renewable energy and fuel-efficient cars and other things, but never said the word climate. And we hope that now that this disaster has gotten people's attention, despite the complexity of the possible links to climate, it's at least got people, including our mayor, to bring it into the political discussion. And we hope that that'll continue and won't be over now that it's cold again.
Right, and you're a political scientist. You're a climate scientist, not a political scientist.
Correct.
My own guess is that Mayor Bloomberg bringing it up did not move many votes at all outside of New York, and yet he raised it as an issue to another level by saying that he was coming out and endorsing Obama because he was taking climate more seriously, and look what happened to my city. So maybe it changes the conversation in Washington because he's got centrist credibility.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it changed the conversation in the media, and Sandy changed the conversation in the media, really. I think the way that climate was covered in the storm, the way that the science was covered during the storm was really quite good, actually. The complexity of the issues, the things the scientists that we know, the things that we don't know, and the subtleties of it, the forecast, the possible relations to climate, all that, the infrastructure was covered really pretty well. And it seemed to me that part of it was because, maybe this is just me imagining this, but it seemed to me that part of it was the media wasn't ready for it and just tried to handle it as best they could, coming in with no preconceptions, just talked to a lot of scientists and was a sort of unbiased filter for the information.
So what do you think needs to be done to make our infrastructure more capable of handling storms like Sandy if we're really going to see more of them in the Northeast and in New York City? The environmentalists generally don't want to talk about adaptation. They want to say prevent it with things like a carbon tax so people reduce the emissions. But the process is already unstoppable to a certain degree.
That's right.
So we have to talk about adaptation.
Yeah, we're committed to a certain amount of warming, no matter what, even in the best case scenario for what we do now about carbon, and could be quite a bit more than that if we don't do anything. So, and we are going to see more disasters like this in New York because the seas are going to be rising as the climate warms, and so we have to be prepared for these bigger storm surges, even if there's no major change to storms. So as far as what we have to do to harden the infrastructure, we have to do something, apparently. I think we've only begun to think about that. I think there's a number of possibilities. The one would be to move everyone back from the coast and have wetlands there like it was, prehistorically. That would probably be the best thing, but we can't do it on a really large scale, given the infrastructure we have now.
And even Mayor Bloomberg, who is famously pro-sustainability with his Plan YC 2030 and bike lanes and everything else, focused on sustainability, he is in no way interested in giving up real estate along the water. So valuable in New York, such quality of life improvement in New York for the people who can afford to live there.
Yeah, so that's going to be a hard sell. We might be able to do some of it, but I think more likely it's going to be some form of hard engineering solution. The two that you hear are big storm gates across the harbor, which is very expensive, very complicated, will make storm surge worse in regions outside of it. So that's would be a big step. And then there's smaller steps like protecting the subways from flooding locally at the subway entrances and things.
Explain that barrier method a little bit more. Is it like what they do in the Netherlands? So Old Amsterdam might teach another lesson to New Amsterdam?
That's right, but exactly. And also London has the Thames barrier. But the area we'd have to cover here, you're talking miles of seawall, and it could still fail. And if in the worst case scenario, it's a big engineering.
That would be a huge engineering job if you mean everything in New York Harbor, from Lower Manhattan and Governor's Island and Staten Island and Jersey City and Hoboken and all of that?
Well, there would obviously there's no plan in place, so one is talking completely hypothetically, but the ideas that I've heard wouldn't necessarily protect the entire city, but certainly Manhattan and some of the areas around and some of the outer areas in Brooklyn, for example, would still probably be exposed, and they would be hit harder because the water has to go somewhere. And so more of it would go there if it's blocked.
So New York and New Jersey, at very least, would have to coordinate something like that, so we're not just shifting the problem to Hoboken.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about something that I think is very far off from even being seriously planned. But I think it'll be considered now more than it was in the past.
It's certainly become a topic of conversation in the last week.
Yeah.
But beyond that, more realistically, what?
Well, I think we could probably come up with a way of keeping the water out of the subways better, just talking about New York City itself. Along the Jersey coast, I don't know, if you put it back the way it was, it's going to be just as vulnerable, whether we can move people back from the coast or put up some seawalls, but it wouldn't look the same if it had seawalls there. So I don't really know what the right solution is, but I'm glad to see that it's being discussed now. We wish it were for a different, not because it had happened this. But.
And it's on the agenda in New York. We'll see if it's on the agenda in Washington in a new way as a result of Sandy, and thank you so much for coming in. Up next, our second-term president's lame ducks. What does the president's victory mean to New Yorkers and the nation, and what can we expect of a second-term President Barack Obama? Joining us, Ester Fuchs, political scientist at Columbia University School for International and Public Affairs, and on the phone, Brooklyn College presidential historian K.C. Johnson. Welcome on Skype, forgive me. We can see you, Professor Johnson. Hi.
Hello.
And Ester Fuchs, we could see you here in the studio.
Hi.
Let me tick off a couple of things that turned out to be myths and get your reaction. Remember that Gallup poll 2 weeks ago that said Romney had caught up among women? Obama won women by 12 points. Remember all that noise about the Romney surge after the first debate? Obama won among voters who decided in October, according to the exit polls. You know that conventional wisdom that late deciders break for challengers? 6% of the electorate decided in the last 3 days, and Obama won them by 6 points. What does this all add up to, Esther?
I mean, I think the conventional wisdom folks should go back to their political science 101 courses, because the data really never supported much of that conventional wisdom to begin with. And I think part of the issue, particularly, for example, on the women's vote, campaigns are important in presidential elections. It's not simply how many commercials you put up there, but it's also the fact women felt disrespected by the Republican Party in this election, and I think Romney could not get out from underneath that. The most striking number to me was that 67% of single women voted for Obama, a larger gender gap than just women in general, and that single women were 23% of the electorate. Which is a significant number.
Single women, well, I guess women make up a little more than 50% of the total electorate.
53% of the total electorate.
And half of them are single.
Yeah, that's right. It's a big number. And so when you start messing around with women's right to choose and birth control, and you can't get up there and support equal pay for equal work, guess what? The electorate isn't as stupid as everybody thought they would be.
Professor Johnson, in historical terms, as a historian, there are things that I'm wondering about, and if they have any precedent. First of all, here we have a president who was reelected, maybe first time since FDR, in the face of persistent high unemployment, in the face of persistent pessimism on the part of the public, and promising to raise taxes to boot, and with the extra electoral tax that he pays as an African American to boot. I mean, all those things should have lined up for a defeat, historically speaking, shouldn't they have?
On paper, yes, they should have. But I think one of the things that we saw in the polls in this election is that on the economy, which was sort of the key issue in terms of polling, even now a majority of people, I think quite correctly, blame the economic problems on Bush rather than Obama. And so the difficulties that he might have faced if he had been president, say, in 2006, and were held responsible for the economic collapse, he actually didn't really face in 2012. And I think one of the great failures of the Romney campaign was just to sort of assume that the American public would have a kind of collective amnesia and believe that the economic downturn started on January the 20th, 2009, and all they had to do was simply run against the Obama economy over and over again. And one of the things that we saw, I think, pretty consistently in the polling and in the exit poll that was taken last night, is that the majority of the public didn't agree with that. They held Bush more than Obama responsible for the economic problems of the last 4 years.
And I guess Romney is likely to go back to policies of Bush. One of the other knocks on Obama, Esther, and from supporters as well as from the organized Republican Party, is that he never laid out a second-term agenda during this campaign. Do you see the necessity for him to do so in an explicit 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of way now that he's been reelected?
I think he will do that. I think he will make more specific what he intentionally kept vague during the election. The polls demonstrated that Obama's strength was his personal character. People liked and continue to like Obama, and they kind of mistrusted Romney. And so adding things about what he would do would have just given Republicans some ammunition about, like, you didn't get this done in the first term, why do you think you're going to get it done in the second term? So I think they had a fairly brilliant campaign, staying on message, and of course they had this incredible ground campaign targeting the places that needed to be targeted for an electoral college win. So this was fairly flawless in approach, even though it frustrated a lot of us who would have liked to have seen more policy articulated.
And when you talk about that ground game and getting out his voters, I have some notes here. Despite the so-called enthusiasm gap among Democrats that we heard so much about, blacks made up the same share of the electorate as 4 years ago, 13% nationally. In swing state Virginia, I read the black share of the vote rose from 18 to 20. The Latino vote share went from 9% of the electorate to 10. The under 30 vote went from 18% of the electorate to 19%, even though we have this image of the fading Obama poster in the 25-year-old's apartment or parents' basement as he can't find a job, or she.
Yeah. See, and this is going to be the big challenge to the Republican Party, whether they're going to go the way of the Whigs and become a disappearing party, and there will be a new second party taking over for them.
Not with 230 seats in the House.
Or, well, you know, in presidential elections, you have to put together a majority coalition, and they've got to focus on the demographics of the country as they are, not as they were. And this coalition reasserted itself for the Democratic Party nationally. The Republicans bet the presidency that it wouldn't. And they can't move forward as a national party. They can be a regional party, state-based party. They can be a southern regional party, but they cannot be a national party without taking young people, Hispanics, blacks, and new immigrants seriously.
Professor Johnson, how much do you agree with that? Do you think the Republican Party is an endangered species after this election?
Well, they certainly have issues that they have to deal with on a national basis. That said, in terms of the upcoming 2014, where I think about these midterm elections, one of the patterns that I think is likely to recur is that the demographic breakdown of the electorate in 2014 is not going to be as favorable for the Democrats as it was this time. So it really means that Obama has to, to the extent that he has a second-term agenda, has to push that very aggressively in the next 2 years, because it's likely there'll be some drawback in 2014. On a national level, absolutely. I mean, we know the obvious answer here. Republicans need to find a way to incorporate Hispanics into the party. But how they can do that with a party base that, really is not very friendly to Hispanics is not at all clear to me.
Historically speaking, does a president in a second term have more power or less power because he's a lame duck right away?
Well, I think the context depends. And to me, apart from Obama's victory, the most significant aspect of last night's results were the results in the Senate. If we had been talking a year ago, no one would have expected the Democrats to even hold what they had in the Senate, which is 53 seats, much less gain 2 seats to get to 55. And several of the new senators are more liberal than their Democratic replacements who had retired. So given the position that Obama is coming in with, a much more friendly Senate, admittedly a hostile House, he has more leeway, especially on administrative matters that might require action only by the Senate in terms of confirmation. So, his position is stronger than I think anyone could have expected a few months ago, having been not only safely reelected, but bringing in with him a group of quite liberal Democratic senators.
So, Esther, speaking as a New Yorker, might we actually see some kind of urban agenda from the president? He dared mention in the clip we played before from his victory speech, Chicago, which he studiously avoided mentioning the entire campaign.
Truthfully, I want to say yes, but the truth is no. There will be no urban agenda. There will be no urban agenda from the national government for a very long time, because it doesn't move the needle in national politics, and no one's been willing to take a leadership position on this. And despite the fact that we now understand that cities are the places that innovate and create jobs and are the center of economic growth, the way party politics is structured, we have isolated our central cities. The geographic boundaries of central cities make them separate from their suburban areas, and what they've done is we've created governance structures that reflect these narrow geographic boundaries instead of this broader county-wide suburban areas. If we had that, we would have a different political conversation. But right now, the way the budget crisis has been solved to a certain extent, if it's going to be solved, is devolved to the states, and then the states devolved to local governments. And so, no one wants to go there.
So, KC, historically speaking, recent second-term presidents, Clinton, Reagan, Nixon, Eisenhower, are there second-term accomplishments that follow a pattern that's different from their first-term accomplishments?
Yes, I think that the pattern tends to be, as presidents move towards a lame duck status, they're...
And forgive me, I forgot to mention Bush, obviously a two-term president.
Correct. And as they get closer to departure, they have less political clout in terms of legislation, and so you tend to see more action on areas where the president has more unilateral authority, which means foreign affairs and to a certain extent social issues. And I suspect that's what we'll see with Obama, a kind of bold attempt internationally, imaginative policies administratively. The difference, I think, between Obama and several of his predecessors in this regard is that he's laid the foundation legislatively already for economic growth over his second term. And so even if he had a Democratic House, it's not entirely clear to me what he would need to do substantially legislatively. So I think Obama is actually in a really good position compared to several of his second-term predecessors to have a quite accomplished final term.
But when Clinton had a Republican Congress for his second term, he made his mark by going small. He proposed small progressive things instead of big progressive things, and things that were framed as wedge issues. So he kind of embarrassed the Republicans into them, but they didn't cost anything. Is that what we're set up for again?
I think not. I mean, the one thing that you can say about Barack Obama is that he tends not to do small and he tends not to do wedge issues. And I suspect we'll see a second term where the focus is on areas where he can work around the Republican House. Because frankly, even as conservative as the House was in the 1990s, Gingrich was, at least at times, willing to do deals with Obama. I don't get any sense from the current House that I think Boehner would be willing to do deals if he had any power, but he's in many ways just a figurehead. And the majority of the Republican caucus is not willing to deal.
Any comment on that?
He did his Medicare, he did his Obamacare reform the first term. There's going to be tons of stuff around health care that he's going to have to deal with in the second term. I'm hoping he'll go after infrastructure spending. That I think that's an area he might be able to get support from a Republican Congress. But most of the things he did not require money. His education reform, the race to the top, there's no money in that. Right. It's like a clone of the Clinton approach. So I agree with you. I don't expect big things.
20 women in the Senate now.
I know.
That's not 50.
No.
But it's a historic high.
Yeah, I am smiling, and you're smiling too. I heard Elizabeth Warren this morning being interviewed, who I think is quite extraordinary, and that was a big win for America and for women. And they asked her, well, will it make a difference to have women in the more women in the Senate? And she looked up and she said, do we really have to answer that now?
And do women
equal pay for equal work?
Right, but Elizabeth Warren notwithstanding, are women more likely to compromise as U.S. senators?
Well, there is research on this in political science, and there's two things that women tend to do that men don't do. They do create an agenda of issues that are important to women. They will bring up the issues on child care. They will bring up the legislation on equal pay for equal work. So they tend to be more likely to support gun control types of legislation. So there's a whole range of social issues and war and peace issues that women legislators will bring up that kind of legislation. So I expect more of that. Whether it will pass or not is a different question, but I expect more of that activity, and that's really important for agenda setting and for the nation.
Casey, what else for agenda setting? How about cabinet changes or anything else you want to comment on?
Yeah, I think that what we'll see is a new and perhaps fairly bold cabinet. Here again, those Senate races were really important. If the Republicans had taken control of the Senate, they might have been able to block or at least obstruct new cabinet appointments. And the big issue hanging over the second term is whether there'll be any Supreme Court retirements and whether Obama will have a chance to accomplish an ideological transformation of the court if Anthony Kennedy chooses to retire. And if that's the case, there could be a lasting Obama legacy of 20 to 25 years in terms of constitutional law.
You think he would bring in a bolder, more progressive cabinet because it's a second term and he doesn't have to worry about re-election?
I think that really hasn't been the Obama strategy. The Obama approach has been to focus on competence over ideology. He tends to have fairly mainstream center-left Democrats, and I suspect that's what we'll see in the second term as well.
Esther, 20 seconds on New York. Anything worth commenting on? Used to work in the Bloomberg administration. New York State Senate, worth a comment?
I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens, because even if the Democrats do take it back, they don't have a lock on the leadership. They've got a caucus that may not vote with them, and a couple of people who've decided, like Simcha Felder, that he's going to sit with the Republicans even though he ran Democratic. So state politics, stay tuned, right?
All right, and that's our day after the election, night of the second storm program. Except for one thing. Ester Fuchs, Casey Johnson, thank you very much. And we go out tonight, for those of you who didn't stay up past midnight, with the final moments of President Obama's re-election victory speech.
You elected us to focus on your jobs, not ours. And in the coming weeks and months, I am looking forward to reaching out and working with leaders of both parties to meet the challenges we can only solve together. Reducing our deficit, reforming our tax code, fixing our immigration system, freeing ourselves from foreign oil. We've got more work to do. But that doesn't mean your work is done. The role of citizen in our democracy does not end with your vote. America's never been about what can be done for us. It's about what can be done by us together through the hard and frustrating but necessary work of self-government. That's the principle we were founded on. This country has more wealth than any nation. But that's not what makes us rich. We have the most powerful military in history, but that's not what makes us strong. Our university, our culture, are all the envy of the world, but that's not what keeps the world coming to our shores. What makes America exceptional are the bonds that hold together the most diverse nation on earth. The belief that our destiny is shared, that this country only works when we accept certain obligations to one another and the future generations, so that the freedom which so many Americans have fought for and died for comes with responsibilities as well as rights, and among those are love and charity and duty and patriotism. That's what makes America great.
The end of President Obama's victory speech. We debut a new program each Wednesday evening at 7:30, and tune into my daily radio show at 10 a.m. on WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. Tomorrow, the second storm and the second day political perspective. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks so much for watching.